All right, I think we're good.
I have one question. Will we be getting the recording after the meeting?
Yeah, it's going to be
It'll be
posted
sent
to
out.
YouTube.
It'll be posted to YouTube and we'll send out the link. So yeah. All right, Akash, you can go ahead, I think.
All right. All right, everyone. Welcome to our first Meet the Mentors webinar. We're really excited to be hosting it. We thought it would be a great way to connect with you all, mentors and mentees. We think it's going to be great. I hope it's going to be great. I hope everyone thinks it's great. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ritvik and we'll get started.
Yep, and just before we get started, I just wanted to clarify the structure of it. So essentially what it's going to be is Akash and I will just sort of talk about our topics for 15 minutes each, and then we'll spend a little bit of time answering questions from Gwyneth, who will be our moderator tonight. And after that, we'll have an open question and answer session, so anyone can ask questions either through the chat or if they just, you could just speak up. All right, so let's get started. So as Akash said, I'm Ritvik, and my area of interest in science is image-guided therapy. So before we even jump ahead, I'm just gonna quickly show you guys this video and let's see what you guys think. All right, so I think I turned on my volume so it should work properly.
Output.
It's been less than a week since the deadliest mass shooting in American history. And foremost in all of our minds has been the loss and the grief felt by the people of Orlando.
All right, so based on that, I have a question for you guys. Do you guys think that video was real or not? Anyone can answer this. Feel free to answer in the chat, or again, like you should be able to speak up if you want to. All right, so let me ask a follow-up question. A lot of people are saying no. So what do you guys think is what do you guys think is sort of the what it is? And again, like this, so these questions are sort of like, if you're a mentee, these questions are for you guys. So go ahead. All right, so I see a lot of people saying, okay, so just assume there is a sync between the audio and video. The reason is, yeah, we're just clarifying, there is a sync, but the problem is that since it's over Zoom, there'll be a slight difference, like the video, whatever I'm sharing, there'll be a difference between the audio and then the actual, what you guys can see. So there is a sync and it does look natural. But yeah, so the timing issue and the unnatural part, it would be natural. But yes, I think you guys have picked up on a lot of it though. But again, like of course with the latency issues, like it's hard to see because of the timing. But if you guys were to see this, it's pretty real. But essentially, you guys have picked up on it, and this is actually a simulated. It's made by a computer. This entire recording. So what was done is essentially they took a ton of recordings of Obama just speaking for a long time. I think it was 13 hours worth total. And what they did with that is they programmed Obama to just speak whatever they put in. And that entire video is fake. Everything from what he said to the actual video. So that's it's just showing what amazing things computers can do. So what he said was fake too. Yes, what he said was fake, meaning like they just inputted that. Yeah, I know exactly. It sounds very real. So they sort of they were able to both fake not only his face but also the way he was sort of speaking and his speaking too. But yeah, so moving on to the next thing. So now I wanted to introduce you guys to something called machine learning. Has anyone heard of machine learning before I go ahead? Yeah? All right, so to basically, nice, Vishnu. All right, so to basically summarize it as much as easy as I can so that everyone can understand, machine learning is essentially just developing algorithms, which are sort of like, I say like formulas or sort of recipes, which using computers so that you can essentially, computers can essentially learn based on a ton of data you give them and then improve. So the best example or the best analogy I can give you guys is sort of like the first time you ever go biking, right? With two wheels and without like trainer wheels. You're gonna start being really, really wobbly, right? The first time, and you're gonna maybe even fall down. But as you keep going, right? You're gonna eventually get better and better the more and more you experience it, and you're gonna improve. So essentially that's what is happening here. The more and more the computer keeps learning, it's gonna improve, and eventually it'll get really, really good at it. So a really common real world example is the recommended section of anything. Let's take Netflix, for example, right? Let's say I really, really like watching a lot of cartoon shows, right? What could end up in my in my recommended, I could have a lot of, I would end up, like Netflix would realize that the algorithm that Netflix built, or the computer that Netflix is using for that, would realize, oh, Ritvik likes a lot of cartoon shows. And what would be in my recommended? Probably a lot of cartoon shows. Similarly, if on Amazon, I was searching up, like chairs or like stools or something, you might see a lot of different chairs and stools, maybe even couches on Amazon when you open up the next time and you see the recommended section. So that's essentially how machine learning is working. And that's a very good example in the real world of how it works. So that brings me to my next point. Machine learning is essentially typically divided into two sub-portions, so supervised and unsupervised. So supervised is essentially what I just told you guys, where based on a lot of data that I'm giving the computer, it will be able to eventually predict that, okay, this is probably a good show for you, or this is probably a good movie for you to watch, right? Versus unsupervised is like, when you just give the computer all the data and say, just figure it out yourself. And to illustrate that better, I have an example for you guys here. So essentially, let's take this. This is going to be unsupervised. So essentially, to describe what's happening here, let's say I gave so if it was unsupervised, what would happen is I gave the computer all of this. I wouldn't say what's what, between what's a dog or what's a cat, right? But then what I do is I just give it a ton of images of cats and dogs, and then I tell it which one's a cat, which one's a dog. And eventually it's going to be able to, after you give it a ton of data, because we're not actually giving it like the labels for this specific image, what it's going to eventually be able to do is say, this one is a cat, this one is a dog, right? So on the other hand, supervised is very, very simple in the sense that, let's say I gave it this basket of fruits and I said, this yellow curved fruit is going to be called a banana. This circular fruit with a circular red fruit with a stem is going to be called an apple. These balls of like these purple balls are going to be called grapes. And then this round orange colored thing is going to be called an orange, right? So that's what supervised learning is. I'm telling it what it is, and then I'm giving more and more images of these fruits and asking the computer, is this a banana? Is this a fruit? What type of fruit is this? And it'll be, if I give it a yellow curved shape, it'll say, this is a banana. If I give it a red apple, it might be able to say it's a red apple. If I give it a green apple, it might be able to say it's a green apple. So I think you guys get what I mean. So essentially, that's the difference between unsupervised and supervised learning. So now I want to transition into a very specific subset of machine learning, which is called deep learning. So before I just like sort of, this is essentially a very simple concept. Basically, deep learning is just a subset, meaning like it's just a part of machine learning, and it's essentially based on how our brains work. So take this example on the left side, right? How does our brain work? Our brain, assuming this person is thirsty, right? Our brain sees this glass of water. That's a sensory input because you're actually like your senses, one of your five senses is seeing. You see the glass of water. Then you send that input to your brain where it goes through a process called integration. And that's basically where your brain is deciding, what do I do now? I'm thirsty. I have to pick up the water and drink it, right? So then finally, the brain will send out a signal to your muscles saying, oh, lift the glass and drink the water, essentially, right? So that's essentially how these deep learning is structured, and it's structured based on something called a neural network. So if you see on the right side, right, this is how a neural network works. You have these inputs, like sensory inputs. Similar to sensory inputs, you have something called the input layer. That's where you're giving it the data, sort of. Then you have the hidden layer, which is essentially going to act like the brain, or the neuron is actually like the smallest part of a brain. So essentially, these are called the neurons, and it's going to act like the brain, like coming up with the different features in an image, for example, or coming up with, or sort of finding the features and sort of working on the classification of something. And then finally, you're going to have this output layer. We're going to say, oh, this is an apple. This is a banana. This is a red apple. This is a green apple, right? So you'll be able to make those types of distinctions. And that's essentially how deep learning works. Whereas machine learning is just like, oh, I give it data and it's going to predict stuff. Deep learning is sort of more complex. It's called deep because you have this hidden layer where it's sort of acting like a brain and sort of working on the problem, I guess. So yeah, so that's essentially an introduction to deep learning in a very simple way. Moving on. So my next question for you guys is, what applications can you think of for, so what applications can you guys think of for machine learning, deep learning? Aside from the ones I gave you, like, oh, like the apples, like classifying apples. I just want to hear from you guys. What do you guys think? Econator. Anyone else? Yeah, classifying images is a good one. Search engine, that's also a good one. Yeah. So again, there's a lot of different machine learning things or algorithms. One of the ones that I've worked with that I just want to talk about a little here is like, essentially what I've done is like, this one's a really weird one, meaning like you wouldn't think it's necessarily just, yeah, Jacob, you're right. Like there's a lot of different, machine learning is a very broad subject. It can be used for a lot of things. And one of the most like weird things I've used it for is essentially just like entity recognition, which is essentially like, let's say I have like a ton of words on a paper, right? Like, can I find out like what are the genes on this paper? Like let's say BRCA1, that's a gene that's implicated in breast cancer. So can I find BRCA1 here? And then can I see what does BRCA1 have, what effect does it have on breast cancer? So in this case, it would be like BRCA1 is implicated in breast cancer, which would mean that it has like a positive relationship. So if BRCA1 is expressed, then therefore like the person will have a better chance of getting breast cancer. So that's sort of essentially what you can do with a lot of these types of models is essentially you can find the relations between different things. And it could be as simple as, it could be as difficult as like, oh, is this gene causing this or is this gene causing that, right? But it could also be something it could be very, very simple things like classifying apples. So it's a very, very broad subject. And that's sort of why that's exactly why I'm sort of trying to cover it as much as possible for you guys. And yeah, so moving on, let's move on to sort of image-guided therapy, which is my research area. So essentially, image-guided therapy, to sort of summarize it, is essentially you're using medical images, meaning MR, CT, ultrasound, etc., to plan, perform, and evaluate surgical procedures or interventions. So surgical procedures would be like, oh, I'm getting a surgery to get my kidney stones removed, for example, things like that, right? So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, based on the image, the kidney is related here. Now, how can I give this information to the surgeon to help them to better figure out the best path to get to the kidney stone, or the most efficient way to remove the kidney stone, and things like that. So that's essentially what my area of research is about. So as I said before, this is a very broad subject, It ranges anything from just like building cool robots to one person in my lab that I've worked in built actually a very cool robot that actually helps people who have like spinal problems. He helped them to actually rehabilitate, like he rehabilitated, meaning like help them to restore their spine so that they could sort of walk properly and things like that. And he built a robot for that. So that's an example of image guided therapy because we're sort of helping people through the process of restoring their spine. And he did that based on the images of their spine, like the MR images. And on the other hand, you could also do things like machine learning, which is sort of what I'll be talking about today, where you can essentially use machine learning for prediction of a lot of things. One of them is, as you guys can see down here, one of them is risk. So essentially, like different people are at different types of risks. Like you can, you know, as I said before, someone with BRCA1 mutation has a higher risk of getting breast cancer. So things like that, we can, based on the images even, predict the probability that someone gets a condition or classify them as like, I don't know, high risk versus a low risk patient, right? And then the second use is going to be something called for something called image shift, like shifting of images or deformable tissue. So essentially what that means is, say for example, you have a very, very soft tissue within like a ball, right? When I squish that ball, what's going to happen? The tissue is going to move around because it's very, very soft. So the initial location of the tissue is going to be different from the final location of the tissue, right? So essentially what you can use machine learning for is something called image registration, which is I can take the images that I'm getting at that specific time, right? When the person is doing the procedure, like the ultrasound images, because those are the easiest ones to use in that case. But while the surgeon is doing the procedure, I can take those images and then based on an image I already created or I took way before the surgery, I can estimate where is this kidney going to be exactly so that they can go exactly where the kidney stone is and remove it, for example, right? So that's essentially how image guided therapy works, and that's sort of like the basics of image guided therapy. So now let's move into sort of what I've done. So before we go ahead, just to clarify, these are what MR machines look like, and these are what CT image machines look like. And before, I'm just not gonna, I don't want to get into like the really, really nitty gritty of like how they each of them works and sort of what the differences are. But typically, they have different advantages due to the different ways that they work, essentially. So you might use like a CT machine for something different for what you would use an MR machine for. So moving on to my research, right? So I've done 2 projects related to image guided therapy. My first one was building a breast cancer risk prediction model. So essentially what I did is, if you guys remember, I built a deep learning, if you guys remember what deep learning is, I built a deep learning model where essentially what I took is these MR or MRI images, and I also took mammogram, which is essentially, it's another imaging technique people use to sort of predict breast cancer. And what I did is, typically, like in the past, models have usually given like 80% accuracy. But what I was able to do is I was able to get 96% accuracy since I used a deep learning model instead. So that was one of my projects. And in the other one, I built a new image registration model. So again, if you remember, image registration is like when you have an original image that you take before the operation, but then during the operation, the tissue shifts. And this is very common in a lot of things with like kidneys. There's something called brain shift that happens in the brain too during a procedure where like when you open the brain, because of the pressure and the loss of like fluids, the brain is going to actually shift. So what you saw before in your original like MR image is going to be in a different place when you're actually doing the procedure. So for that reason, what we worked on is we took a lot of porcine kidneys, which are essentially pig kidneys, and we took a lot of images of them, and then we built a model so that you can take MR images and then convert them to CT images, and then we did the same with ultrasound images. And you could do that during a procedure, and it would really, really help because you know exactly where the kidney is within the body. So that way, like the surgeon, it makes it much easier for the surgeon to do the procedure. So essentially, that's just in a nutshell, sort of that captures my interests and yeah, that's sort of what I've done for the last 2 summers. And this is a picture of me at the science fair. All right, so I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen, and Akash is gonna take over now.
Alrighty, let me just get started up here. All right, guys, so my specific area of research, which I'm going to be talking about, are portable nuclear reactors. So before we get started into nuclear reactors and everything, I'm just going to ask you guys a question. All right, so my question to you guys, you can answer in the chat, is when you think of the word nuclear, what comes to your minds first? So you can just go ahead and answer in the chat. All right, so when we're talking about nuclear, there's a lot of different things we can talk about. Nuclear is a very broad topic. There's a lot of things you can do in nuclear because all nuclear means is it relates to the atom. And anything that has to do with the nucleus of an atom or anything smaller than that, we consider that to be nuclear. What we're going to be looking at specifically today are nuclear reactors. And what a nuclear reactor essentially is that it's a power plant. And it uses the power of nuclear reactions to generate enormous amounts of electrical power. And so you can see in this picture right here, this image on the left, that's the inside, that's the core of a nuclear reactor. And if you're looking at a nuclear reactor from the outside, this is how a nuclear reactor would look like. The smoke that you see coming out of here, that's just water vapor. So yeah, so let's talk a little bit about nuclear reactors, a little bit more than that. So when we're talking about nuclear reactors, there's something really special about them. So I want to ask you is, how much energy do you think a nuclear reactor produces? I'm going to say, like, you know, would you say it produces enough power to run a car? Does it produce enough power to run a house? Does it produce enough power to run 10 houses? How much power do you think that a single nuclear reactor can produce? So one single nuclear reactor, believe it or not, can produce as much energy needed to produce enough energy for 100 cities the size of New York or New York City. So one single reactor can produce enough energy to power all of those cities over a single day. So the thing when it comes to nuclear energy, what makes it really special is that it's super powerful. So if you imagine something like wind or solar energy, it's not going to be able to produce enough energy to match something like nuclear power because nuclear power is just so powerful. If you're having enough energy to power, say, like 100 cities with one nuclear power plant, you can forget about every other, you know, source of energy because you don't need it. If you can produce that much energy, a single nuclear power plant is enough. So just as a little comparison, what I like to show people is that the United States has around 96 nuclear power plants. And obviously, all of these are producing a ton of energy. If you want to produce the same amount of energy as these 96 nuclear power plants in the United States, you would need a wind or a solar farm the size of New Jersey in order to match the same amount of energy that these 96 nuclear power plants produce. Nuclear power plants, they usually work on two different types of nuclear energy generation methods. It's either nuclear fission or nuclear fusion. So both of these produce energy when they're done. So in the case of nuclear fission, what you're doing is you're splitting the atom. And when you split the atom, you end up releasing some thermal energy. And thermal energy is then converted into electrical energy in a nuclear reactor. When it comes to a fusion reactor, what you're doing is you're actually combining two different atomic nuclei together. And when you do that, you produce thermal energy as well, which is then converted into electrical energy. Generally, fusion is a little bit more powerful than fission, but right now, like all nuclear power plants are fission reactors. We do not have any fusion reactors yet, but we're getting really close to them. So when it comes to current nuclear reactor technology, it's really promising, right? You have these amazing reactors being able to produce all this energy. But even still, nuclear energy is not perfect, right? It's not like a miracle technology. There's still issues with it. Some of them that come to my mind is that it's really expensive. It takes around 22 billion US dollars to construct a single reactor. And that's just an investment which, some people feel like it's not really that necessary. Second thing that comes to mind is size, right? For a single nuclear reactor, you need to have up to 5 square miles of space. They're huge. They're a large piece of machinery. You just need to find a place to put them. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the government are not willing to give up 5 square miles of space to put this giant reactor there. And one of the things that comes to the public's mind a lot is nuclear waste, the public perception of nuclear power. Even though it's the safest power in the world, as amount of deaths per unit of energy produced, a lot of people are still scared of nuclear power. Maybe it's because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Some people, misinterpret nuclear bomb for nuclear power. Nuclear reactor meltdowns, that's always an issue people are have in their mind. So trying to find a way to improve current reactor technology is number one for a lot of nuclear physicists right now. And the first thing that comes to everyone's mind is, why don't we make nuclear reactors smaller, right? It's not a new idea. It's been around there for a long time, right? If you shrink down a nuclear reactor, you make it smaller, you make it cheaper because it's a lot smaller, and it also reduces the risk of what's the different, if the reactor does melt down, it's not going to be as much of an issue because it's really small. There are some designs out there. This one right here, this is the Spark reactor from MIT. It's around the size of a house. And this is a reactor called a small modular nuclear reactor. That's around the size of a large mall, which is still a lot smaller than the current reactors we have. Still kind of big, but the big problem that comes to mind is when you start shrinking down a massive nuclear reactor, not only are you shrinking down the size, you're also shrinking down how much energy you can produce. So sure, the reactor might be smaller, but it's not going to be producing all that energy that we were before. So I guess the first thing that comes to everyone's mind, at least through pop culture when they hear portable nuclear reactor, is Iron Man, right? That's the original portable nuclear reactor, the arc reactor. The original portable nuclear reactor idea came from a comic book. And I guess people started to take it seriously. So that really was my inspiration, right? Everyone's inspired by that when it comes to science. So could we really shrink it down onto a scale that small? Can we design a portable nuclear reactor you can hold in your hand, yet still produce the same enormous amount of energy as a larger nuclear reactor? And I'm happy to say that's my interest in research, and that's what I've been working on, is ultra-portable nuclear reactor technology. So this is a picture of one of the reactors that I've been working on. I call it the EMPOWER nuclear reactor. So EMPOWER stands for the electron manipulating power reactor. So my research, what it focuses on, is finding the most energetic nuclear reaction we can and harnessing it on a portable scale to generate electrical power through nuclear reactions. And so in order to do this, I partnered with the US Navy Nuclear Research Laboratory and MIT to find a way to harness this power on a smaller scale. Explaining how exactly the reactor works would take a very long time, but I'll give a quick summary and the basic gist of how we actually shrink down nuclear power onto a smaller scale. And it's in 3 steps. So how to build a portable nuclear reactor, this is the blueprint. Number 1 is you find powerful nuclear reactions on a smaller scale. When you have super powerful nuclear reactions, essentially what you can do is you can have less nuclear reactions happening. And the thing is since the nuclear reaction is so powerful, it doesn't matter if you have less of it because you'll still be generating that same amount of energy as a larger reactor would. And the specific nuclear reaction or nuclear decay that I look into is something called neutrinoless double beta decay. And what it essentially is that it's an atom, right? We call it a radioisotope. And what it's doing is that it's producing these high energy electrons back and back and back. it keeps on producing these high energy electrons. And if you keep on producing electrons, you're essentially generating electric current, right? Electric current is nothing more than electrons going by really fast. So what I would say is, okay, if this nuclear reaction produces these electrons for us, why not just use those electrons being produced in this nuclear reaction to generate a current? So that's number one. Finding that nuclear reaction, that's what's producing our energy through the form of electrons. And then number two would be accelerating that reaction. How do we make that reaction happen a lot of times? So we're generating a lot of electrons. And if we're generating a lot of high energy electrons, we're generating a lot of power. So one of the things that I look into is something called the quantum anti-Zeno effect. And what it basically is we shoot a gamma ray laser at an atom over and over again. And what's interesting is that by doing this, we're actually making it so that this atom undergoes that nuclear reaction like a million times faster. And if that's happening a million times faster, you can think of it as you're generating a million times more energy as you would if you were just, using the normal reaction. And finally, the last thing that we want to do in our reactor is once the reaction's over, normally it doesn't happen again, right? The reaction's over, you can't cause it to happen again. What we want to do is sort of recycle that nuclear reaction and make it happen over and over again so we can keep on producing those electrons. And what we essentially do for that is that we use these really small particle accelerators to basically cause that reaction to happen again. If we provide a little bit more energy to that atom, it's going to keep on producing those nuclear reactions until the filament in our particle accelerator runs out. So just a couple of statistics of what we're aiming for with such a small nuclear reactor. It's 500 megawatt hours. So that's about half the energy of a normal nuclear reactor. So maybe, sure, it's not powering 100 cities, but we'll be able to power, say, 50 cities with such a small nuclear reactor. It's a 30 years lifetime, so that's something really cool about nuclear reactors is that they can last a really long time before you have to refuel again. And for this particular one, it's around 30 years. And the final cost point, right, that's an important one. It's $10,000, and that's really inexpensive. When you think about like a traditional nuclear reactor costing billions of dollars, and then you have a smaller reactor which can only cost like $10,000. So the question I want to ask you guys is, what are some like potential applications for having such a small nuclear reactor other than like, building Iron Man suits? All right, well, a couple of applications. The first thing that comes to my mind is obviously we had that example of cities, right? Producing energy to power cities. That's probably like the most important one because if you only have a single reactor powering so many cities, you don't need to have any other fuel source. This is your fuel source for the next 30 years. One of the main interests for the Navy, at least, is like submarines, right? If you've ever, like, I don't know if you guys ever been on like a museum submarine, but submarines can get really cramped. It's really hard to put stuff in a submarine because it's basically a can underwater, and you're basically stuffing as much stuff as you can into it. Our current submarines are nuclear. We do have nuclear reactors aboard submarines, but if we can shrink down the size of the nuclear reactor inside a submarine, you have more space for, like, say, the crew on the submarine. You have more space for torpedoes. You have more space for other equipment. Just frees up a lot of space. And speaking of space, think about rockets, right? Rockets need a ton of energy, especially if we're going to go, say, like interstellar space. We're going to need a lot of energy to do that. And of course, having so much energy on such a small scale could make it really easy to like implement into a rocket. Another thing, this is really cool. This picture here, that's called a railgun, and it's a really, really, really powerful gun, which a lot of like companies are testing out to be implemented on our ships. It can fire up to 100 miles away, which is really impressive. But it needs a lot of energy to function. And so maybe something like a portable reactor would be really useful to powering something like that. And yeah, of course, the quintessential example would be like exoskeletons, right? Powering something like a Iron Man suit. That could be something really cool. Maybe not useful, but it would be something really cool to do. Yeah, that's the end of our presentations for today. Ritvik, if you want to repeat that little the format of the question and answer session, you can go ahead and do that.
Yeah, so feel free to contact us at these two emails here. If you guys have any questions about our research, we're more than willing to sort of answer your questions. Aside from that, yeah, so as I said before, we're going to move into the, we're going to have Gwyneth ask us each a few questions, and we'll do that. Let's say we'll do that until 7:55, and then we'll move on to question and answer session, since we did start a few minutes late. All right, so Gwyneth, you just want to go ahead and ask us.
Okay, so the first question is, if you conducted your research in a lab setting, how did you get that opportunity? And if you didn't conduct your research in a lab, then how do you get the materials for your project and work on it like without a supervisor?
All right, okay, so I'll go first on this one. So specifically for this, so I've done two projects over the course of high school. One of them independently and one in a research setting. So the independent one, typically you should be able to, there's typically a lot of different resources you have, specifically if you have a lot of resources at your school lab. There's a lot of resources online where you can sort of buy stuff and just figure out stuff online, a lot of it. And so what I worked with for one of my independent project was C. elegans worms. And I was able to actually obtain those from a specific, something called the CGC, which is like a center at the University of Minnesota, where they sort of sold those type of stuff to educational institutions. So things like that you can do at home, versus in a research setting, I think you can sort of do much more than just what you can do in a school laboratory, of course, because you have a lot more equipment and you get to work with other people too. So regarding your question about the research portion, I obtained my research internship just by sort of emailing a lot of professors. There's also a lot of programs you can apply to, internship programs, and those are also a really good way to sort of to get an internship or get a research experience.
All right, thank you.
I'm gonna answer this question as well. Just like Ritvik, I was also 1 year, at home, 1 year in a research setting. So the best way to do it is, I think, so as far as doing it at home, computers have gotten really powerful, and a lot of this stuff can be simulated at home. At least that's how I started out, just simulating nuclear reactions instead of doing it in a lab setting. But as far as lab settings go, sometimes it's really about who you know when it comes to research. I knew a couple people who were working at the U.S. Navy, so I was able to reach out to them because I knew them personally. And same goes for MIT. I had a friend who knew a professor, so I got to be introduced to that professor through my friend. So when it comes to research, a lot of times it's just who you know. And if you don't know anyone yet, sometimes if you have a research project in mind, and you know exactly what you want to do for your research, sometimes cold emailing professors, it works sometimes. Just send them an email. You can find their email on their website, or the website for their school, and just let them know hey, I'm thinking of doing this project. This is what I want to do. would you be willing to like help me out, get some lab space in order to conduct this project?
All right, fantastic. So the next question is, how did you guys choose your project ideas?
Yeah, so for my project, well, of course, for this project, it was sort of through the lab, so it sort of aligned with what we were already doing in the lab. But some of it was sort of, again, like what I thought out, because I knew that we were obtaining images for like breast cancer and stuff. So I knew that I could try to do something like that. And I sort of proposed the idea based on the fact that we had these images. But when I did do my independent research, my idea sort of came from, so again, like this idea sort of came out of my passion for like deep learning and machine learning, versus when I was doing my independent research, I was sort of more into biology back then. So so of course, like the first thing I thought of was like, oh, can I use a model organism like fruit flies, or C. elegans, or even mice? But like, of course, mice is too much in a school setting, and we didn't really have the proper things to actually work with fruit flies. So I went with C. elegans. And based on that, I sort of did a lot of research. And as I said before, I eventually found this center that gave out a bunch of strains. So I was even able to find, there were strains for like that where you could sort of simulate Parkinson's disease in C. elegans, like Alzheimer's disease in C. elegans, ALS, and things like that. And at that time, I was interested in Alzheimer's. So I was able to sort of just come up with an idea based on that. So again, like I think, yeah, I think AJ, which project are you referring to? Could you just type that in the chat? But yeah, so I think that, oh, he's talking to you, Akash, after. But so essentially, yeah, so I think that like the best way to sort of go about choosing your project is just do a lot of background research and about what you're passionate about. And from there, you'll eventually come down to something specific. Like I came down to sort of just as I sort of came up with the model organisms idea, where I started looking at all these model organisms, you might be able to start thinking about like some biochemistry thing or some specific disease that might lead you into something, or maybe even like a specific topic like deep learning that might lead you towards a more specific research project.
Yeah, for me, it was really like my 7th grade teacher had Stephen Hawking's The Universe in a Nutshell. He had that on his bookshelf. I was never like really into physics before that, but I kind of like read through that, and Dr. Hawking did like a really good job of like, he was like explaining like super weird stuff. Like he was explaining string theory, quantum mechanics, all sorts of different things in like a simple, easy to learn kind of way that like anyone could understand it. And I kind of like was like, this sounds cool. MIT does this like thing over the summer. It's called HSSP, where like if you're like a student in like I think like 7th grade to like a high schooler, you can like go in and like take some like classes at MIT. And I decided to take a couple of physics classes, and it just really stuck on me. I really liked like the modern physics, like nuclear physics, quantum physics. It just appealed to me because there's so many different applications of it, especially like coming up like quantum physics. Previously, people just thought like it was just like a cool thing you can talk about, like, oh, I do quantum physics, but like now there's real applications of it. Like people are designing quantum computers, which are going to be like millions of times more powerful than like computers we have today. And obviously nuclear energy, that's always been something really cool. So there's just been so many different applications, and I just thought like, this is something cool that I could do a project on. I started working on it a little bit, and I really just got like hooked on it. And I thought, sure, this is what I'm gonna work on.
All right, great. So those were just the 2 questions that I was planning to ask. So Now, if you guys have any other questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll like move on to the mentee
Yep.
question.
So just for clarification, a lot of you guys are putting in chat, so putting questions in the chat. So just to make sure that it's streamlined for either me or Akash, just write our names before, like be like, Ritvik, do you think this? Or Akash, how did you do this, right? So that way it's sort of like we know who to answer. Or if you have a general question, just be like both of you guys, so that both of us would answer it. Or also, if you don't want to put it in the chat, like for example, like I know Minu has a question, and I don't know who it's addressed towards. So if you could just like type that in the chat, then maybe. All right, both. Okay. Yeah. So I think let's answer Siddharth's question first. So I'll go first, I guess, again. But yeah, I started interning in the summer of 10th grade. And yeah, this is at Harvard Medical School. And essentially what I did is sort of, as I said before, the way I sort of got this internship is essentially I went out and just emailed a lot of professors, and because of that, I was able to get a few of them to sort of respond to me. And we'll probably try to give you guys a few resources maybe to even help you to do something like that. But essentially what I did is I sent them my resume and just said, I'm interested in your research because I've done X, Y, and Z before. And that's how I sort of ended up partnering with researchers there. Yeah.
Yeah. Same here. Going into 10th grade this summer. So the summer before 10th grade, that's when I started as well. Like once again, as I like to say, just let the people know, like get your voice out there. Let people know, like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm interested in. Kind of like a concrete, like, this is my project. Would you like to help out? And if you're not gonna get a response right away, you're sure to get it from like someone, as long as you're like really explaining yourself and like, you know, being like, I really want to work on this. I have this idea. Would you be able to help me out? So yeah, like I said, I started around the same time as Ritvik. So yeah.
All right, so I see like a private question from Minu. She's asking, I think this is for you, I think. Do you think that to do a project like this, the kids should already know the subject very well, even though an MA, physics, etc., is not taught before senior year?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, so I definitely say, like, for me at least, like I said, I never like knew about any of this. I was only able to learn it because I took extra classes in it. I think yes, it is a bit of a learning curve. It is not something where, you know, you would be able to just like look up the stuff on like over a month and then be like, oh, okay, I know everything now. There is a bit of a learning curve. It does take a little bit of dedication to it. I'd say like knowing basic physics first, like, you know, F equals ma, Newton's laws, like things like that. That comes first, and then like once you kind of have that like solid, like, you know, you understand that, you can kind of venture into like different types of physics, like the modern physics and things like that, and kind of learn about it a little bit more. So I started early, like I said. The reason I've been able to do this project is because I took that class in the summer of 8th grade, and I was able to kind of like learn all that information beforehand. I didn't really understand all that information when I was in that class. Like I maybe understood like 80% of that information, but that was like more than enough to like get started on the project at least. Now I know a little bit more. As you start doing the project as well, you'll start like, you know, learning about new phenomena, learning about new things in physics. So there's always learning that's happening while you're doing the project. But yeah, definitely like you need to have like a good base before you start any project, regardless of what field it's in.
All right, so to answer Sid's next question, yeah, so I'd say like in your resume, it would just be like, it depends, again, I'd say it really depends on what you're interested in specifically, but let's say assume I'll just give you a few examples of what they might look for. I mean, it's typically just like sort of I'm interested in this specific thing, and this is sort of what I've done. And like when you say proper research experience, I think what they look for, and I think that might be similar to Akash too, because he said he did independent research before. It's sort of like you're demonstrating that you've already have like interest in this specific thing somewhere in your resume or somewhere in something you've done before, right? And then you sort of show, or you've also just done a general research project before. So essentially, just like what I'd suggest, I mean, personally, from my perspective, I think through the mentoring program, try to do like a research project and see if you guys can submit it to not only our science fair in our journal, but also maybe even try to do it in your state fair or state journal. And based on that, what you guys can do, I think, is sort of what you guys can sort of do based on that is sort of like go out and reach out to professors in that specific field that you've done these projects in, saying, oh, I've done this, this, and this. I'm really interested in the work you've done, and could I have, could I have this opportunity? But just to answer, like, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, Akash. I just want to answer like some of the short questions later on. Yeah, all right, great. Never mind. Gwyneth did it. So yeah, you can go ahead, Akash.
Yeah. So like same here. I've done like research in like biology and things like that, but I've never done research in like physics before. So like I really couldn't just be like, yeah, I had this prior research experience in physics, because I didn't. How I always present myself when I'm looking for a lab is that if you already have an idea of like what your project is and you already know this is what I'm going to do, you don't have to have like a perfect procedure, but just like a general idea of I'll be using like say X technology to achieve Y result. And here's like a general idea of how I want to do it. If we're talking like, I'll just use the example of my nuclear project. I didn't have any prior research experience in nuclear energy. I just said like, hey, I want to use this technology, right? I said like, I wanted to use this special type of nuclear reaction to achieve this result. Would you be willing to like give me some advice or like some mentorship, some lab space like that? What you're doing is you're showing the person, like the professor or the researcher, you're showing the professor or researcher that you really did do your research and you understand the phenomena, you understand like what's going on. And it's not just like, you're just reaching out like, hey, I want an internship. You're actually like passionate about it and you actually understand some of the material. So if you can kind of demonstrate that you understand it, I'd say like, because like everyone has to start at some point, right? Like even people who are doing research, at one point they didn't have any research experience and they would have had to like, go out there and find a research experience. So just kind of like show the researcher or like whoever you're reaching out to that like you actually understand the material, you're like passionate about it, and you're ready to get to work.
Yeah, I think Akash, you're definitely right. Just wanted to add one more thing is sort of sometimes even you don't even need to necessarily say like, oh, I want to do XYZ using XYZ. I think sometimes it's okay to leave it open-ended, especially if you're sort of saying like, again, like my first project was biology. It wasn't deep learning or machine learning in any way. So it's sort of, I think the way you write it and sort of the way you present yourself to the person or who you're emailing or you're talking to, right? I think that's what matters the most. But I definitely think Akash is right. Like if you can be as specific as possible and sort of convey that you sort of, in some way, you sort of have an idea of what you're talking about or what you want to do, right? Like showing that you have this, you want to do this or that, or like, yeah, we want to do X, Y, Z, or you want to do something else. I think that's sort of what's most important in trying to secure a research internship or opportunity. I don't know. Do you know any other programs that colleges provide other than just MIT for middle schools?
So I don't know any off the top of my head, but I can just say like if you do a quick Google search, right? Like if there's a college nearby you that you know, and you can just do like XYZ college summer program or something like that.
Yeah. I know a lot of like pretty I know there's one at, there's a few at Harvard, there's a few at Brown. There should be a lot in a lot of places. A lot of schools have summer programs, and there's a lot of enrichment activities and stuff too. So I think it might be if you go onto their website, or as Akash said, just search it up. I think that's maybe how you can find those classes. Just search up like, oh, as he said, like XYZ University summer program, or XYZ University, whatever specific type of class you want, maybe even. And you might be able to get it through there. Yeah. All right. Does anyone have any other questions? I guess let's keep going till like 8:15, since we sort of didn't get to sort of, yeah, we went a little, started late. Yeah, so these meetings are going to actually happen every week. So every week we'll have 2 new panelists, hopefully in 2 new different subjects, because of course no one has the same exact research. So everyone will always have something new and different to bring to the table. And we hope to sort of have it every week. And then the last week of every month, we'll actually have like a professional scientist from a actual sort of like either some sort of like a scientific company, or someone who just does research in real life, to sort of just come and talk to everyone about sort of what they do. So that's our plan with respect to these Meet the Mentors, and also the Meet like a Science for Professional webinars. But yeah, so on, I don't know, before, if anyone has any other questions, keep adding them to chat. I just wanted to say one thing is sort of, I think, I don't know if you guys have had the ability to, but if you go to IPARS.org, which is our website, you should be able to see in the top corner, specifically, give me a second, let me figure it out. In the top right corner, you should be able to see all of our icons for social media. So feel free to go and to join our social media, because every day we'll be posting things about what our mentors do, what our mentees have done. And I think Akash is going to show it right now, but yeah, what our mentors are doing, what you guys, our mentees, are doing. Also, we'll be posting different things about like, different scientists in specific things and sort of what research they've done when they were young. We'll also be posting about a lot of other stuff. So as you can see, he's showing you, there's a lot of different things we're posting. So you guys should try to join and sort of look at all of our posts, because we'll have something new for you guys every day. But yeah, does anyone have any other, okay. So what do you mean by classes, Siddharth? Do you mean like HSSP? I think HSSP is very specific to MIT. Like as I said before, like MIT, you can search up MIT middle school classes and you'll get HSSP. So if you try doing the same for different universities, you should be able to find different classes for specific universities. Yeah, does anyone have any other questions?
I actually got a private question a few minutes ago, and it says, what advice do you have for rising middle schoolers to continue sustaining their research interests, and how can they connect with the research community in schools and colleges?
Yeah, Akash, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. So I think like the #1 way to like be interested in research and like continue that is just participate in your science fair every year. Like every year when I go to the science fair, it's not just my project. I look at like all the other projects in the fair and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. Like everyone is doing something really amazing. And that's just kind of like inspiration, right? Like seeing all the amazing things people are doing. I'm like, yeah, this is something that I want to do. As far as like, wait, what was the second part of that question, Gwenna?
It was, how can middle schoolers connect with the research community in schools and colleges?
Mm-hmm. So once again, I'm going to give that same answer to science fair, because the people who come to the science fairs are usually like university professors or like professional researchers. And like every once in a while, you have like someone who works in a similar field that you do. Like I've always like connected with people at the science fair. I've had some judges at the science fair were like really interested in my project. And like, for example, I know this one judge, like I connected with him my first year of science fair, and like every year since then, regardless of if he has my project to judge or not, he still comes by to me and he like, you know, we connect with each other like outside of science fair as well. Like we're always discussing different research. We're discussing what I do, what he does. And that just kind of like branches off, right? Like if you know one researcher, right? He's going to introduce you to like say 2 or 3 other researchers, right? That he knows, and that's going to branch out. You might have another researcher, and she might know someone, and like, you know, it just kind of like branches out from there. Like I know that there's like dedicated like programs. I know like once you're in high school, this might not be like a middle school thing, but like LinkedIn is obviously like out there if you want to like create an account on there. But like as far as middle school goes, I think the best way to do that is to go through the science fair. And when you go to the science fair, you find all these different professors. And the other way I can think of is like just emailing professors who are like kind of like in your subject area, and you know, getting to learn a little bit more about, you know, a certain topic because you are interning with them. That's another way to do it.
Yeah,
And then
I'd
like
like to say
finally,
like, oh sorry,
like,
I didn't know
yeah,
if
you
you
go
finished.
ahead, Vivid.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say like, since you were talking about science fair a lot, we'll hopefully be able to provide the same type of opportunities as much as we can through our science fair. So you guys should definitely participate in that. We'll be bringing in like a lot of judges who are, as Akash said, there'll be a lot of professionals coming there. So that's sort of your chance to sort of talk to them and be like, about all of the different opportunities that they might be willing to give you, or even a lot of them might just serve as mentors. So that's the type of thing that you guys should sort of try to be doing, especially if you want to sort of get involved in research. The other thing is we'll starting soon, right? Like we'll be starting clubs at high schools where our mentors can sort of start a club at their high school and recruit a lot of mentees. But another thing we'll be doing is we'll be having something called chapters. So chapters will essentially be like a bunch of clubs, right? Because a club is for every school district. So you'll have maybe 5 total clubs together, right? And when you have those 5 total clubs together in one chapter, we can have all the middle school students join that chapter too. And that way you guys are involved with a lot of people, anyone who's in the high school who's doing research in your area, anyone who's also doing research in your grade or in another grade, right? So you'll be able to be, you'll be working with all of these sort of people on these not necessarily on these projects, but we have a lot of enrichment activities for you guys as chapters, clubs, and like a lot of volunteer opportunities. That's how you sort of get to know each other. And then again, like as I said before, word of mouth, as Akash said before, word of mouth is really important. So like if you have like someone who's like a junior in high school, right, in your chapter or your club, you can just be like, hey, how did you get involved in research? What sort of yeah, so you could just be like, how did you get involved in research? What sort of things that have you done in general, right? Like and then you can sort of even ask them if they'd be willing to like help you to or sort of help you with your resume and things like that. But I just wanted to also say that like we're here to support you guys. We'll be hosting a lot of things like we'll be hosting a lot of different webinars, not only like the Meet the Mentor webinars, but we'll have webinars where you guys can just come in and ask questions about research, anything in general. But also we'll be able to ask questions about, we'll have different webinars where you can ask questions about just resume writing, how to apply to internships and things like that. We'll have sort of generic things where we have people in our organization who have done these types of things and gotten into these types of programs to actually just come and help you guys as much as they can. Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions? We have 5 minutes left. Feel free to ask us anything and any question you have. Could even be specific about our research if you want.
My question is kind of long, so can I just ask it like
Go ahead.
the microphone? Okay. It's for yours, Rivik. I was kind of confused because I did take a couple of machine learning courses. I don't know if you know, but on Coursera, there Andrew NG, he has a machine learning course, at least like the fundamentals of it. Have you taken that course?
Yeah, I have.
Right. So I've done like I think I'm on week 5 of that. Do you know if that like you'll really need to know all the particular formulas, all the calculus behind it, or is the
Well, yeah,
libraries
I mean, keep in mind, this is, the way he structured that course is sort of that it's supposed to be for everyone from like people who are sort of like in high school who are just like very, very, very interested in that, to like professionals who are trying to sort of understand that. And that's why he sort of covers a wide range of stuff like computer principle, like how does it exactly work with like gradient descent and everything, all the way up to like in general, what is machine learning and all the basic level stuff I tried to cover as much as possible through my small presentation. But I think you know what I mean, right? Like he tries to cover everything, and I think what you should try to aim to do is sort of understand it as the best you can, right? And yeah, like I don't know what grade you're in, of course, but
I'm
I think
I'm in ninth. I am doing calculus, but the thing is not that. If you do look through all the assignments he gives you, like all the specific codes,
yeah.
the way he structures, like it's pretty much, it feels like you're creating codes from scratch. Is that how you did your research project, or did you have more powerful libraries when you did your project?
What do you mean by creating code from scratch?
It feels like the way you create that code in those assignments is from scratch. You have to do a lot of manual coding.
Well, yeah, that's because he's trying to make you get you to learn it. So, I mean, that's just how the course is structured. I mean, when you're doing it in real life, you'll be able to like look at what other people have done online through GitHub and stuff, and there's a lot of repositories and stuff through GitHub where you can use if you need any help. So, I mean, yeah, I think the course is just there so that you can learn, and then based on what you learn in the course, you can apply that in different ways and sort of and you don't have to just like memorize everything in the course. That's not the reason for it. It's just to explain everything at a very high level so you sort of understand what's going on. That's what he's trying to do, I think.
All right.
Answer your question?
Yep. Thank you.
All right, great. All right, does anyone have any other questions? Maybe one more before we're done. Yeah, if anyone has one more question, then we'll just do that, and then that'll be it for tonight. Feel free to either speak up or just put it in the chat. Okay, I could answer that, but so Vishnu, what do you mean by wave data? Yeah, I think yeah, I get that, but what do you mean by wave data?
Like electrical impulses, like it's just a bunch of numbers. It's more like numbers structured sequentially, like basically you're given a bunch of one-dimensional tensors.
Yeah, I think, okay, so you should be able to use, maybe try some of them. I don't think GAN is like, I don't think you would use GAN for that specifically. CNN is typically used for images. Yeah, so just I think if you search it up, you should be able to see like, okay, this one's used for this typically. I know those two are used for, like GAN is typically like, I don't know if you know how GAN works, but essentially it's not, I don't think GAN would be the right one for this specific case. And CNNs are typically used for image data. And I have used CNNs for, I have used a CNN once for audio data, but not electrical signal. So I was able to use it for like MP4 files. But I don't know. I think maybe what you should do is sort of see online what other people have done. I think that's like a really, really specific thing that I'm not able to answer without doing more research maybe. Yeah. All right, great. But yeah, I think, yeah, just sort of everyone, if you guys have any questions, as I sort of said before, they're not there anymore, but my email is rick.pulley@gmail.com. And I don't know, Akash, if you want to put yours in the
I'll
chat
put it
too.
in chat.
Yeah, I'll put mine in the chat too. Or he has it, great. So basically just sort of send us an email, any other questions you guys have. But it was really great to have all you guys here. You guys were very engaged, and we really appreciate that you guys all came out. But just before you leave, we have one announcement.
Yeah. So just for mentees, there will be a check-in coming soon, and we're gonna send a form to know which dates work for you best to just check in. And so yeah, basically, if you're a mentor, be on the lookout for an email and fill out the form as soon as possible. Yeah.
All right, great. Yeah, so we'll be sending out check-in forms for mentees specifically. So we'd really appreciate if you guys fill those out. Because if you guys fill those out, it's much easier for us to be like, to understand like, oh, because if there's any problems with like your mentor being like, oh, like you guys aren't sort of doing on the right path, meaning like your mentor sort of does something separate from what you're trying to do, maybe. Things like that, right? We can definitely help you guys with that, and we can change your mentors. We can help you guys if you need any resources, anything, right? So that's why we're here for you guys. And yeah, so again, there's also going to be one for mentors too. So this is also for mentors. You guys, it'd be great if you guys could please fill out these check-in forms that we send out to you guys. Yeah, with that, we were really, really happy that a lot of you guys showed up, and you guys are asking such great questions. But hopefully you guys can attend the next week's one. We'll send out the details soon, hopefully. And yeah, see you guys next week if you're coming next week.